It's working?
I figured I told them you were down there regaling your fans downstairs with stories of animated shows past. So
That's what I was doing, Andrew.
how did you know? There you go.
There we go.
Now we can hear. Welcome everybody. Hey, first of all, big thanks to all the volunteers at Terrificon. You guys are doing a great job. I've been here for a couple of years, and this is the smoothest operation yet. So very nice job on that. My name is Joe Stuber, writer, producer, host of Comic Book Central podcast. If you're not familiar with it, there's some flyers in the back. The gentleman to my right, if you're here, you know who he is. Rick Hoberg, everybody. We're talking about, well, I mean, the theme, we're going to back-to-back animation panels coming up with yourself and Bob Camp as well. So we'll talk about animation. We'll talk a little bit about everything. We're going to talk about Spider-Man, we're going to talk about Hulk, we'll talk about Star Wars.
Great.
Some Star Wars fans in here. Then we'll turn it over to you. So think about some questions that you want to have. If you like some of the shows from the past that we're talking about, some things you want to be interested in how these things sort of come together, we're going to be talking about that. Let's go back, let's go all the way back. First of all, what kind of a kid were you? Were you interested in comics as a kid? Were you interested in comic books coming to life, cartoons?
Absolutely. It literally was obsessive from the time I was 5 or 6 years old. My dad bought me my first Del Tarzan comic book. And I fell in love with that stuff. And animation I loved too. I watched cartoons in the afternoons and on Saturday mornings as a kid. But the one that really clicked with me was when Johnny Quest came on in about 1960. And I just fell in love with it because it was basically a comic book brought to life, and it had a lot of sci-fi stuff. It had a lot of Terry and the Pirates in it. It was just, and years later, my first job in animation was given to me by Doug Wildey, who created Johnny Quest. And so it was just fortuitous for me, because the minute I heard who was calling and he asked me if I'd like to work on a show with him, I said, absolutely, you know. So it was a great run that way, and I basically read a lot of comics. I fell in love with Marvel Comics just shortly after they started up with and changed their name to Marvel Comics from Atlas, because as a kid I grew up reading Archie and mostly DC Comics, a lot of Batman, Superman, those titles, and then my folks would travel a lot to go fishing on fishing trips, so to keep me quiet, they bought me comic books. And at one point on one of these trips, we stopped at a store in Bishop, California. I remember this bookstore like it was yesterday. And they were all out of everything I'd read other than these Marvel comics. So I picked up Spider-Man #3, the first issue of the Avengers. I have all of these
yes.
things. I kept
that was the horror store. Everybody says
no, I never got rid of anything. No, I never got rid of anything. And a couple of Strange Tales with the Human Torch. And I believe one of them was that issue where they brought back Captain America for the first time.
Yeah.
And immediately I was just hooked. On the way back through, headed home, I told my dad, we got to stop one more time. I got to get every other thing that's on the racks there.
What did Dad say?
He was glad to keep me quiet. Yeah, so that was fine.
That was the iPad of its day.
It's pretty nice.
Just throw a kid an iPad today, but throw a kid a comic book.
Yeah, but comics are so tactile. They're like, I don't really enjoy digital comics much because I like the comic.
They don't have the old comic smell.
They don't smell like comic books. They don't feel like them. They're not a tangible thing. So it's like books. I listen to audiobooks and I own a Kindle, but I prefer reading a book personally.
Yeah, it's nice if you got to take a bunch with you, but there's nothing like that feel.
Right.
The old. Now, I mean, I could probably speak for everybody in here. We've all read comic books when we were kids. We all watched cartoons. How do you translate that into working in animation? And you started off in comic strips and comic books. I mean, how did you sort of break into the business first? And what were some of those early projects that you worked on?
The first, I was a big fan, like most of you are, and these were the early days of the kind of organized fandom. There were things back in the 1930s and 40s, but the 1960s were when fanzines began to proliferate. I worked on a fanzine with a guy out of Morristown here. I never actually met him, a guy named Gino Membrino, and Gino and I put together, and Don Parmalee was the other guy, and he did some work of note, I believe, in comics, and we put together a fanzine. And then I later became the president of a comic book club in Orange County, California, where I grew up. And because of this, I met Russ Manning, who was the creator of Magnus Robot Fighter And he was well known for drawing Tarzan. He not only drew Tarzan after Jesse Marsh left the comic books for Dell, he took over the comic strip in the 1960s, and probably for my money did the definitive Tarzan.
Okay, that's what I wanted to touch on, because I know sometimes you mentioned about your role in that. What was your role in working on that, and how amazing was that?
Well, that's what I'm getting to.
That was one of your first loves, was the Tarzan comic.
Exactly, I love Tarzan. Yeah. And I basically met Russ, and then we had art shows, and I was beginning to show my art at these art shows. Within the club, we had the art shows, and Russ at one point had seen my work, and he called me about 1975, and he said, yeah, listen, I need some guys to draw stuff for overseas publication, and, you know, are you interested? He said, you're going to have to, the thing I need is somebody who can ape my style, who can basically do a Russ Manning. So I figured, what the heck, I can trace Russ Manning, and that's how I actually got started, was doing that sort of thing. And then that job lasted a very short time, maybe a year, and right after that, I got a gig working with Roy Thomas on some Marvel comics, because he was starting a group. Having left Marvel in New York, he was still an editor, but he had his own group of guys, and I was among the first that started working with him. And I did some what ifs, I did some Conan and Cole fill-in work, basically, just illustrations and nothing of major note. And then I did some what ifs for him, which we did real well. And Star Wars came along. And he basically couldn't get anybody interested in it who was already getting work, because everybody thought this was a shot in the pan, basically. It wasn't going to go anywhere. And I knew what it was, because I was a movie fan. I'd been reading about Lucas's work in the LA Times for years, and I knew what Star Wars was. I didn't know what it was going to be, but the minute he asked me would I do some stuff for this, I said, absolutely, give me the job. And those covers made my career.
Well, I think those are even stories too that Marvel almost had to be convinced to do Star Wars in the first place. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't a lock and load situation. No. I mean, it was. I mean, we look back at it now and go, wow, how can you not? But
originally it looked at as like one of those movie adaptations, because back in those days, Marvel was adapting old movies and new. They did Logan's Run, the Jaws. They actually did Seventh Voyage of Sinbad too. They did an issue of that, and these things sold terribly. But Marvel was in a terrible strait. Most people don't know that the late '70s were a terrible time for comics. Marvel was almost ready to go out of business. They weren't getting any sales. Even DC was in bad straits, but not as bad as Marvel. And Star Wars came along and saved Marvel. It sold so well that they reprinted these comics over and over again. They sold millions of copies, which was unheard of at that point. And it literally got people reading comics for Marvel again, so it was a huge windfall for everybody. Originally, they were just going to do it as a one-off and call it a day.
Well, that was the way for all of us. Well, back in the day, that was the way for us to relive the movie. We didn't have VHS, we didn't have all this. You either had to go see the movie. If it wasn't in the theaters, you had to wait for the reissue to come back. So we got those comics and just relived them over and over. And like you said, they just kept repackaging them. Challenges of going from a comic strip to comic books. What are the? I mean, obviously the difference in the storytelling is you got 4 panels, but.
It's a really difficult medium. I did Star Wars, the comic strip, after Russ passed away. They handed it to me because I was the assistant. And I did it with Dave Stevens for about 2 months, and it's incredibly grueling. It's deceptively hard to do. It looks simple. Most people do a comic strip so that it's very much like a soap opera. So it's people talking to each other. And soap operas are very easy to do for comic strips because you're just doing headshots of people talking. But Star Wars is an adventure story, so you've got to have action and other stuff. Well, try telling a full-blown story in 3 panels a day, where at least 1 panel every day has to be a recap of something that you've seen before. It's just brutal. I disliked it intensely. I've only worked on that one, and I did a little bit of work on another strip that's eluding me at the moment, but I really wouldn't do it again.
Well, it's easy if you had Peanuts or something like that, if you're Charles Schultz and you're just telling a joke.
Exactly.
That day, but if you're telling us,
but still, that takes brilliant comedy thinking.
But you're not
better off doing the simple drawing. Yeah, the simple drawings. I mean, the quintessential comic strip for me is Calvin and Hobbes. I just think it's the best thing ever done in comic strips.
Yeah.
But you look back on the ones that I loved as a kid: Prince Valiant, Tarzan,
Like
all of
Mandrake
those.
the Magician.
Yeah, Mandrake, Terry and the Pirates, all of those. They had like full Sunday pages to tell a story, and that was hugely helpful, but still tough work to do.
Yeah, I would imagine too. Now, how do you segue that into animation? Because we're sort of put us in that in historical perspective too, because this is when Marvel, late 70s, Marvel, they were kind of farming out all the characters
Right.
in different animation studios, and then like, well, let's do our own. Why farm everything out? So kind of put us in that era. And how
They
you
actually weren't the same entity. It was Marvel was the name on it, but it was Stan Lee who wanted to go out there and
He
get
got
into
into
the
the West
movie
Coast.
business and into show business of anything he could get into. He just wanted to get into it. And he's part of, many of you probably know, he was part owner of Marvel because his uncle, Martin Goodman, created Timely Comics back in the 1940s. He was the initial publisher. Stan got on as, I think he was a 15-year-old as a writer, and then became an editor very quickly. And Goodman's son, Chip, I believe his name was, became the publisher, and he's the one who what do I say, ferried it through the 1950s as Atlas, and then it became Marvel Comics. And Stan always had a piece of the action, very smart businessman. I admire him highly for that. And he ended up wanting to be in show business, but these entities were always at odds with each other. They actually had to license out from Marvel Comics to Marvel Productions, so they didn't actually own the project. But that was one of Marvel's big problems in the movie and television business, is they optioned their projects to too many people who couldn't get these things off the ground, but still had the option, so they couldn't take them anywhere else. That's why it took years to get Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four onto the big screen. And it's also, we're very fortunate that when Marvel Studios decided to start up, that Marvel was going to become a studio unto itself, they didn't have access to those characters. So we got the Avengers. And that, to me, is the best of all worlds. I think the Avengers are the best.
It worked out. But
Yeah, you have those individual characters.
Yeah.
Well, to me, those guys were the greatest. When I read the comics initially, the book that just stunned me was the Avengers, because I got Thor, I got Captain America, I got the Hulk and Giant Man, Ant-Man.
Well, that was the thing, they kind of
Wasp.
said, well, what characters do we have left? And then somebody went, oh, it's the Avengers. That was the characters.
I think they're perfect. In fact,
Yeah.
the best thing they could have done is do Iron Man, because Iron Man is very James Bondian when you get him into a film. But on top of that, to cast the perfect guy, Robert Downey Jr. He is Tony Stark. Even his life reflects who Tony Stark in the comics was. So it's just a perfect piece of casting.
Yeah, and even that almost didn't happen. He even had
I know,
a audition for it.
yeah.
It was amazing
Yeah.
too. So, yeah, well, I
So
actually
let me finish about
Please do.
how this worked. Transitioning the stuff to animation you wanted to know about. That is that's the difference between comic storytelling and animation storytelling when you're doing these kind of things is the fact that one thing is done in design, that is, comics are based on moving the eye across a page in some simple form, an S, a Z, any simple form, a 2, that makes the eye look like this and follow the story, where animation is all about movement and timing. That's why when you take a character, Spider-Man's a great example, like Spider-Man, in the comics, he's just talking all the time. I mean, the panels are filled with things he's saying to bad guys while he's leaping across something, saying things that couldn't even be said in the time that's given there. So it's a difficult thing to translate into film, but what I'm getting at is there's timing and movement involved, as opposed to what your imagination is piecing together between the panels when you're reading comics. So it was a matter of translating that. And it took years to get it right, to be honest with you. I actually don't think the Spider-Man was done well until Spider-Man the Animated Series came out in the
1994.
90s. Yeah, I think that was the first really great one. And I worked on all of these, so I feel I have a critical eye to it. But we were pretty proud of Spider-Man and his amazing friends.
Yeah, let's talk about some of these things. I mean, we're looking at 1978. Was it Jaina and the Jungle?
Yeah, Janet, the first show I worked on was Godzilla, the Hanna-Barbera version. That's the first job I got.
Okay.
Doug Wiley producing and directing it, and Jana was brought on because they wanted to do NBC liked it so much, they wanted to do an hour, and they called it the Godzilla Power Hour, and they put in Jana the Jungle, where who the heck thinks that a Jungle Girl and Godzilla work together? I don't know. But they were two separate things, Jan of the Jungle being a Sheena, Queen of the Jungle type of character, basically, and pretty silly.
Yeah.
You know.
But I mean, a good start too. And then one of my personal favorites, probably many out here too, the Super Friends. And I know your work was probably minimal on some of them, but I think you were on like 8 episodes. What was your role coming into the Super Friends? And then talk a little bit about the challenges of bringing these comic book characters, these iconic characters, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, all of them, into sort of the limited animation world of the late 70s.
The way it's done best with that kind of animation is the way they did it in Johnny Quest. It's basically still pictures with a minimum of movement, and you're looking at it the way you read a comic book. And it works really well. It's basically what you all would know as an animatic. We use them these days to, when I do a storyboard, I quite often work in a program called Storyboard Pro these days, and that allows me to time it out so that when it's sent to the director, it's actually a small movie. It's just a series of pictures, but it looks semi-animated because I'm animating movements throughout it, you know, doing extremes. And an extreme in animation is something where, let's say I'm sitting at the table like this and I go like this, a gesture. Well, the two extremes are this, and the animator fills in what goes between, basically. So that's the way this kind of limited animation works best. When we were doing shows like Super Friends and Spider-Man, they wanted to push it further, so you got some really terrible animation, and they were paying so little for it and started going overseas to have it done that you have some of those wonderful things that happen. One of my favorites is when a character's looking like this way and talking, and then his head turns to look this way, but his mouth stays over here talking. I probably saw that 50 or 60 times in Super Friends.
Didn't we even get, I mean, sometimes there's like strange things on the logos, or maybe the coloring isn't even right, and we kind of, I guess as kids, you know, if I'm 6, 7 years old watching that, I don't care.
You don't pay attention?
No, Superman's live action, I've been hearing it, but yeah, now you can go back and look at it and kind of pick it apart. So
sometimes they just didn't have the money or the time to do retakes. They just said, no, we're going to have to live with that, or they'd cut it out and do something else. But
the deadlines were there.
Yeah, the animation was so limited and it was so cheap, they were paying as little as they could for it.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the competition became more vibrant that you had to start upping the ante, and that happened going into the late 80s and especially in the 90s. I think the show that really upped the ante for all this was Batman the Animated Series.
That was a game changer, yeah.
Even though, you know, I had helped put together and was working on X-Men, the animated series, and our wonderful thing was, even though it wasn't nearly as good looking a show, we kicked their butts every week in the ratings. So
that's right.
It was like, you know, as much as I love watching Batman, it's nice to be on top. Basically.
Yeah, the X-Men was huge too. So well, let's talk, I mean, we've got this whole list of ones. I want to throw out to the audience if you have any questions too. We got one right here already.
I got a question, because, well, it's a two-part question.
How about, we've got time.
How long did it take to make just one episode? Because I know they have to make them like 6 or 7 or whatever months in advance. And then my favorite when I was a kid growing up was Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Now it's available on DVD in Great Britain, but it isn't in the United States, and I can't understand how a show that popular, at least from my
Yeah, Rick Hoberg, why can't we get it?
Why can't I get it? Why can't we get it?
Hey, I'm just a storyboard artist. I know what you're talking about, and to be honest with you, I think this has to do with who's got distribution rights and so forth, but now that Disney's in control of all this, I think they'll be marketing all of it, and sooner or later, that will be available. I don't understand it either, because I figured it was buried for years, and then it showed up on either Cartoon Network, Disney XD started showing it too. That's where they started showing the Marvel stuff, and they were showing X-Men the animated series and a few others, and those became so popular. But none of us knew that this was leading to the deal that would make Marvel a part of Disney, basically. Which I actually feel was a great deal. I think that worked out well for me.
And so your other question too, just like how long does it take an episode of Spider-Man's Amazing Friends?
That you're probably in the ballpark with 7 to 8 months from beginning to end.
One episode.
One episode, but you got to remember there's other episodes being put together at the same time. They have a production schedule. They need to stay with it. It's longer now. and they do much more quality work now. Like I work on Transformers Robots in Disguise right now, and that's a beautifully done show. It's just really lovely to look at.
So even with the computer assist, it's taking longer than just straight up animation to do?
Are you of the opinion computers have simplified things?
Well, fair enough.
They haven't.
Fair enough. Well, it's the other argument too. Is like these movies cost like $250 million, and you're like, I thought it should cost less by now. But yeah, I would think they would shorten the time. But you're saying it's actually longer now for animation.
Well, I think it you just have to build it into the production. There's a discussion going on Facebook and in the media, like on Geek Tyrant and these things about Sausage Party, that R-rated animated film that just came out, and how they basically hired a bunch of kids and they drove them like slaves to get this thing out and stuff. And that's what happens in this media when you try to push this stuff through, because it's not easy to do, and it does take a long time. I worked for a number of years recently on Halo, and I got to sit in the studio for a long time with guys animating this stuff. And it just takes a tremendous amount of time to do just one little sequence. Have any of you seen that piece from Halo 5, the opening shot where they jump out of the ship and they go down under the snow and they're battling all those guys? I know the guy, I watched the guy work on that sequence. It took him over a year to do that 1 3-minute sequence. And he was working on it every day. And all of that's rigged. So it's not like he's actually drawing the characters or anything. A rigged figure in CGI animation is basically a built object that's built in the computer, and then they rig it. They put joints in it and stuff like that so it'll move at the right places. And the animator just has to pose it and animate it out. But it just takes forever. Animation is a very meticulous process. And something like that is just stunning to look at. So the early stuff was not as good, and that's why it was taking less time to do, basically.
Question right over here, Superman.
What was your favorite episode to work with, or favorite strip of all the ones you've done?
Now, are you talking of everything I've done, or of animation, or what?
Everything.
I have a lot of favorite things I worked on. Star Wars is always near and dear because I still continue to work for those people. I do a lot of the line drawings you see on t-shirts and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff's my stuff. Lucas, they've got me working on episode 8 right now. So I love the fact there's new Star Wars films because I get to draw Star Wars at least a month every year now.
We talked about that because there's Star Wars 1977, 78, whatever would have come out, the comic book. Issue number 5 is a t-shirt.
I've heard that. I haven't seen it, but I've heard that.
I own it.
Yeah.
Many of you probably own it too. It's on a t-shirt. The Millennium Falcon. Red t-shirt.
That's one of the ones I see all the time. I met a young lady.
T-shirts for like 30 years.
I met a young woman on an airplane. We started talking about what we were doing, and she was interested in what I did. We had gotten off the flight. I happened to be coming from a comic book convention, and she says, "What is this stuff you do exactly? What does it look like?" And I looked over, and there was a guy wearing one of my Death Star t-shirts. I said, "It looks like that. That's one of them right there." He was walking right past us. And the two I see the most are that Death Star t-shirt and the Millennium Falcon t-shirt.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, that's mine. The resin. Yeah. And there's one out there that's an iron-on. Remember the old iron-ons, plastic feeling things? There's an iron-on one with a Millennium Falcon and some TIE fighters on it and stuff. That one is a Millennium Falcon that when I did it, I hid my wife's name in the little machinery on one of the prongs of the Millennium Falcon. And this was done at Lucasfilm years ago. I finally told them about it. They weren't happy. And they eradicated it because I don't want to fool this guy. I've worked with him for 30 years. And they had published it a number of times. Well, Disney just recently got hold of all this stuff, and they obviously weren't paying attention because there it is out on the market again.
Lesson learned. Don't tell them anything. Well, it's a good segue too. Then how do you go from the Star Wars comic to getting into these licensed things for Lucasfilm? Because that's a big deal.
Oh yeah, believe me, I feel very fortunate.
You're doing it right now.
And everybody in the business has been trying to get this job for me. Everybody for years. He's the guy I worked with just years ago. Said to me just the other day when we were working on new stuff. He said, "So what's this con you're going to?" I told him some of the guests. He goes, "Oh, Neil Adams." Yeah, and I said, "Yeah." He said, yeah, he tried to get this job for his continuity studios years ago, but no, we're happy with what you do. And I went, oh, that's awesome.
Stop telling him you're hiding stuff in the drawing.
Exactly.
Keep that gig. Keep
Well,
that.
when I did tell them about that, they then went through a bunch of the stuff I did for the Phantom Menace, and of course, they thought the big hit in the Phantom Menace was going to be Jar Jar Binks, right? and they had me do like, I don't know, 20 or 30 drawings of this character. Well, at one point, they called me in after the fiasco with the Millennium Falcon. They said, did you write "I love you" in the modeling of Jar Jar Binks' arm? I said, no, it wasn't intentional, but I gotta tell you, it does look like I love you, you know?
Who was the illustrator? The always put Nina, his daughter's name in.
Alberto, oh gosh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, he's one of the great caricaturists of all time.
I'll remember when the panel's over. But the other question too was your favorite.
This is what I call the old guy symphony.
I know,
right
I got it.
Well, I forget. Thank God
I
for the
know.
internet.
And yeah, I'm already there, so that's the problem with that. But one of your favorite episodes was one of the questions too. So do you have a favorite episode of Spider-Man's Amazing Friends or?
No, my favorite cartoon show I've ever worked on was one I worked on about 8 or 10 years ago. Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. It was the best Marvel cartoon ever done. Just really faithful, and we enjoyed doing every minute of that. The writers knew everything about this stuff. They knew how to condense it where they had to tell the stories. They gave us opportunities to do things that added to the iconography but stayed faithful. I even got to do the sequence with Captain America's origin, and I got to do a thing with where Bucky dies. Cap had to let go of the rocket. He basically was knocked off the rocket as it flies away. And before it exploded, I got to have Bucky salute him. And I'd always wanted to see that in the comics. I thought that would be appropriate for the character, basically. And then, in the second season, we brought him back as the Winter Soldier. You know, so it went from the early days to the new stuff, and it worked great.
Marvel's done some great stuff with
Yeah.
the animated series
Yeah.
too. So yeah, good question. Right over here.
How would you have a new person get into the industry? Any recommendations for somebody who's starting out?
Yes, these days there's so many good people in the industry, both writers and artists. Schooling is imperative. If you're going to be an artist, go get as much education as you can before you take off to do it. Learn all the technical stuff. Learn perspective, learn proportion of figures and how figures work. Learn acting as much as you can. Just all the technical is what makes you an actual artist. Once you apply all the technical stuff, your own personal artistry just comes out in that. It's not about mimicking other people, although it's okay to hate people that you like. You know, I was a big Gil Kane, Russ Manning fan. A lot of my work reflected that for years, and then I grew out of that and I became my own man, basically. But all of my early work has huge amounts of that stuff in it. And I actually learned that people, learn from that. But I think education is primary these days. There's just too much competition. And another thing is I would always say, find a way to get into a couple of different avenues. What's kept me alive in the business is being in animation and being in comics. Both of them, once I was done doing comics, literally, the day The Strangers ended for me, it was the last full strip I did for Ultraverse. They called, said, whatever you're working on, we'll pay you for it, but just stop working because, it's done. Marvel's shutting it down. And once that happened, my wife said to me, well, what are we going to do for you're not going to be able to make a living now for a bit. I said, let's give it a day and see what happens. And the next day, I got a call from one of my best buddies in animation. He said, you want to get back into the animation business? And it was just a quick transference over. So having a lot of doors open to you is big. Advertising's fine too. It's a terrible way to make a living. But listen, anytime you get to draw for a living, it's a blessing.
Just keep doing it, right?
Yes, just keep doing
whatever's
it.
there.
Exactly.
Yeah, we hear that in acting and with a lot of different things.
And do a lot of self-promotion too. Facebook, websites, whatever's popular time ever. I know Twitter and Instagram are great these days. I don't do Instagram enough, but that's where all the guys are promoting themselves.
It's rickhoberg.com, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a new website that's out there too.
No, it's been around for years. It was a crappy website until recently. Now it's a great website.
The redesigned website. So very good question. Next, another question. I've got one about Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. That is one of my all-time favorite cartoons. Animated. Do you prefer cartoons or animated series?
It doesn't matter to me, cartoons is what I grew up calling them, so I'm.
Okay, I think the older I get, the more I'm reverting back to cartoons. I think I like
Yeah, yeah.
cartoons better. So, Firestar, always some issues with her design.
Yeah. That was NBC's doing, you know?
Yeah, and we'll keep it family friendly, but what were
Well,
some of
we
the...
can talk, but it has to do with the anatomy.
Yeah, what were some of the challenges you faced over the seasons with Firestar's design?
Well, now, we're talking about a period where we were just coming out of a period during the late 60s where they did all of these pretty violent and ridiculous cartoons. They were fun to watch. Herculoids, Mighty Samson, a lot of those that Hanna-Barbera did were really great cartoons, terrific, but they're nonsense. They really have nothing going on but a bunch of fighting. And there was a reverberation, there was a backlash of especially mothers who felt that these were too violent for children. Well, this was a huge drawback then. All of a sudden, there wasn't going to be any guns in any shows, there wasn't going to be any violence of any sort, and it took us 10 years to get back to where we could actually do action-adventure. And what you're talking about reflected those times, and then when NBC bought Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and I designed Firestar from an initial drawing by John Romita. He basically did a pretty girl, which was Mary Jane Watson, that's what it was. And he made her flying with basically just, I think it was just a bodysuit. I don't recall too much detail being on it. Well, I went through and designed the character for animation, used his basic look for her. I changed the hair into a fire design, basically, and then added the wrist items and so forth to give it a little more character. And she was voluptuous, and you know, it was a bodysuit, so I tried to give as much information as I could and still make it friendly. Well, every season, NBC said, at the beginning of a season, we went 3 seasons, said, no, you know, we've got to make her breasts a little smaller, and you know, you can really see too much of her butt. We're going to have to make that, you know, so there's not a big, you know, crack in her butt.
So what a difference a
So by the time,
line drawing makes.
and by the time season 3 comes along, literally, it's just a bump. You know, there isn't any line showing, there's any curvature of the gluteus maximus whatsoever, and her breasts are much smaller. But it was the times we were living in, and the thing that changed that is a show that I worked on. We were given, Hasbro came to Marvel after we'd finished Hulk, and that was basically it for Marvel, and they offered us a 5-episode miniseries of G.I. Joe. We could do whatever we wanted. We could.
Oh, the gloves were on.
The gloves were off. We had
Nice.
guns to play with. We had fighting to play with, and we went a little crazy. But it was a gigantic hit. This thing was, after it was done, and it was nicely done, was given was out to what did they call it at the time? It was multiple markets. It was in syndication. It wasn't a network show. And it was shown, it was, the only stipulation was it had to be shown 5 days in a row wherever it was shown.
Okay, so you didn't have the network parameters on
Exactly,
you as much.
exactly.
Okay.
So it was shown sometimes in afternoons, sometimes early mornings, wherever you lived. It was a different time zone, but it was a massive hit. The only show that did bigger ratings at the time was Roots. It was
Wow.
It shocked us because we just went, a cartoon did that kind of ratings? And especially to beat Roots it was a huge event in television at the time. And we ended up then getting the series going on and doing Transformers and stuff. And this opened the doors to where by the early 90s you had X-Men, you had Batman. It led to those wonderful Superman and Justice League cartoons and just all sorts of great stuff. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the second version of that, was something I got involved in, and that was just a joy to me.
You even had Rainbow and RoboCop, I think, leading
Yeah.
up to it, too.
Those were network shows.
Yeah.
Those were network shows. There was no guns in those, if you go back and look at them.
So
If
big
they were, they
difference
were just
between the
carrying.
syndicated, yeah.
Yep.
So you worked out all your frustrations in the G.I. Joe cartoon.
Well, you know, Rambo,
Things you couldn't do.
I worked on Rambo because I got a good offer over Ruby Spears, so I went over there to work.
Still can't believe they made that animated series. That's just...
What, Rambo?
Yeah, it was
Well,
just
Mr.
crazy.
T was
It's
just,
toys, I know.
was even worse, and the worst one they did was Turbo Teen. I don't know if any of you remember that show. It was about a kid who turned into a Corvette Stingray, no Freudian things going on there, you know? And it was like, really, who thought of this, you know? So those were a lot of terrible cartoons, but that was a point when, you know, you were making a living as well, because it really was a transitional point between all the great stuff that was to come, like in the funny animal stuff, you had Animaniacs and things like that, and Ren and Stimpy that were ahead and stuff, and it was a great opening for all.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that here in the next few minutes. minutes too with Bob Cam too. One of my favorite characters is Captain Carrot. You worked on Captain Carrot a little bit,
yeah.
the comic. Will we ever see a Captain Carrot animated film? Like that to me seems like a no-brainer with all the cast of characters.
I think what you've got going on with characters like Captain Carrot is DC and Marvel are at a point where they don't want to have to pay royalties to anybody. And Roy Thomas and Scott Shaw and who's the guy who actually created it? It was Sam, I don't want to say Sam De La Rosa, it was Sam Granger, an artist who worked at Charlton and at Marvel and DC. He inked a couple of my pieces. He actually came up with this idea, and then Roy and didn't do it. He ended up with Roy and Scott doing it, but they don't want to pay any royalties for anybody for this, and these guys own a piece of the action, so I think that's why it's doubtful you'll actually ever see that.
Well, it would just seem like the toy line would just fall.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that just.
And with CGI animation, I think Captain Carrot would be a huge hit.
Yeah, you
Do
could
any of you know who Captain Carrot is? It's basically a Bigfoot superhero thing. It was a parody of all of the superhero things that were around at the time. And it basically was a group of animals who got superpowers and they lived in an anthropomorphic world. Right.
Yeah. So like Howard the Duck, but just with like a bunch of billion different animals.
Right, exactly. And it was an animal world. The humans didn't exist. In fact, in the first issue, I believe Superman crossed over into the alternate universe, and that's
classic first issue. We've got
and there he is, you know?
We've got a couple more minutes here. Does anybody have any more questions about something? We've got one right over here.
Yeah, are there any current or recent animation that you're not involved with but that you're a fan of?
Yeah, I love all the movies. I mean, the movies are just really delightful and enjoyable. I think the most stunning surprise was How to Train Your Dragon. That was such a touching film. I mean, the ending on that film was totally, you didn't see that coming. And nobody had ever done anything like it. But almost all the good animated films are just thoroughly enjoyable. And I certainly watch some of the cartoon shows when they come on. I can't come up with anything at the moment, but I do tune in and I do watch, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, but who's got the time? My gosh, I have to take the time to sit down and watch Daredevil and, you know, and Stranger Things and stuff. In fact, I just finished Stranger Things, and I gotta say, that's my new thing right there. Stranger Things is just awesome.
You know, you're kind of immersed into the world of Star Wars right now, but is there some animation that you're working on or that you could be working on coming up, or what can we look for?
Transformers Robots in Disguise is what I'm on right now, and I'm hoping to do more with Hasbro. This is actually my first run with them, and we don't know exactly what's going on at Marvel. They're kind of in transition. They're still doing Guardians of the Galaxy, but Disney has kind of given them their own reign. They won't be under the Disney tent anymore animation-wise. So we'll probably see less of the silly cartoons like, you know, Ultimate Spider-Man and Hulk and the Agents of Smash, although I had a really fun time working on that show. Those are geared toward little kids. They're trying to dumb down the stuff a little bit, and I think the last great one that was done was Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Yeah, that was the more serious.
I wish they'd have done more of those.
So is that almost like Marvel Studios? Is its kind of own thing? It's
Yeah,
owned by
it
Disney,
is.
but it's another
It is,
animation.
exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it's an outside studio, but they were under the watchful eye of Disney. Still are.
All right. Well, how can fans find out more about you? We mentioned the website, Hoberg.com.
Yeah, and I'm certainly on Facebook and stuff. I don't promote myself overly much, but certainly I put up artwork when I finish something, like when I get home and if I've got pictures of stuff I've drawn at a convention like this, I'll put those up or whatever I'm working on at home. But so much of my stuff is licensed material that I can't really show. It's not, the comic book artists can get away with showing covers and stuff that they're doing because the comic companies don't care. Well, let me tell you, Hasbro and Lucasfilm, they care. Yeah, you don't want to be the guy who gets thrown in prison for that because literally a thing something leaked at Lucasfilm a year ago when we were working on Rogue One, and my boss there was one of the suspects because there was only a few people who could have leaked these things. Luckily, it turned out to be somebody, but he had to call me and said, "You didn't accidentally?" I went, "Absolutely not," you know. So I said, "You're willing to inspect me, come look at my computer and stuff," but it wasn't me. And this guy's doing prison for that.
Oh.
They're not kidding around with this stuff. Yeah, Lucas and Disney are not kidding around.
You can joke around, but yeah. But you've got the gig. You're not going to put any more of the jokes in, or at least you're not going to tell anybody about
No,
it.
heck, the in-joke thing is for young guys. You know, I honestly don't have time for those kind of things.
It's a sweet gig. We love wearing your T-shirts. We love seeing these things, and it's amazing. You've done some amazing work. We're about out of time today, but thank you so much for joining
my
us
pleasure.
today. Man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure doing the work.
If you're a fan of animation, we got Bob Camp coming up here in a few minutes, so you
Bob's
mentioned Ren and
awesome.
Stimpy, so yeah.
Bob's
25
awesome.
years
He's
ago.
very funny.
So, thank you, sir.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All
Look
right.
forward to hearing the podcast.
Yes.
I always love hearing